Hello, and welcome back to my scrutinization of Bernardo Kastrup's book, Analytic Idealism, a consciousness-only ontology. And we left up with searching the search for the term ontology and left off at page 59. And I'll just carry on from there and go back into the groove, so to say, and carry on. Okay. The mainstream physicalist ontology posits that reality is constituted by irreducible physical entities, which draws on calls ultimates. Okay, page 59. The ontology of pan-experientialism is analogous to micro-experientialism, except in that the former entails the stronger claim that all ultimates instantiate phenomenal properties. Page 60. Indeed, the first postulate of cosmopsychism is that the cosmos as a whole is the only ontological ultimate there is, and that it is conscious. Page 60. Finally, the ontology of idealism is characterized by a combination of two propositions. Finally, the ontology of idealism is characterized by a combination of two propositions. An ontology cannot be a proposition. It's completely misguided, right? He obviously doesn't understand what he's actually doing. First of all, propositions has nothing to do in an ontology or in establishment of an ontology, right? What you do when you propose, you are extending you're actually trying to establish objectivity about your knowledge with somebody else using that proposition, right? If I, in this sense, as an example, as I used with the elephant on other occasions, right? If I experience elephant and I want to establish whether or not, or at least attempt to, you could say, right? Establish whether or not somebody else is experiencing elephant, then I can propose my knowledge, right? Of course, given that I have classified elephant as a kind of knowledge, otherwise that's not what I'm going to propose. Then I'll maybe propose something else that I consider knowledge, depending on my epistemology. So if I point and say that's an elephant, I'm proposing something using language to somebody else, and in the hope that they can identify, and I would suppose I would also have to have the idea that that person is working from the same kind of philosophy and idea of ontology and potentially metaphysics, and have the same definition of knowledge as I have. That's why I'm proposing the knowledge. Otherwise, there would be certain ground floor kinds of philosophy I would need to agree with that person on before I start to propose my knowledge, right? But when I propose the elephant, I am making a proposition, a statement about my knowledge, or at least that's what I attempt to do. On the other hand, that person might see that as maybe a lie or whatever, right? I can know that. I can get to that, right? But then the proposition is a reference to knowledge, and the fact to me is elephant, and knowledge, because elephant to me is a kind of knowledge. In this case, the fact is elephant. But when you're talking ontology, that's the foundational ground floor for even starting to working on epistemology in order to get to knowledge. So you have something you can propose and agree on in an objective fashion with somebody else. So it's completely misguided. It's next level circularity, this, right? Ontologies are not put together by propositions, right? It would be the same as saying it is as valid, at least to me, to say I'm making a proposition. That's an elephant, and that's a bicycle, and my ontology is put together by these two propositions. That would be equally valid compared to this it just sounds more academic and more smart, and all these fancy terms used, right? Ontology of idealism is characterized by a combination of two propositions, right? Phenomenal consciousness, A, phenomenal consciousness is irreducible, and B, everything else is reducible to a unitary and universal phenomenal consciousness, right? It's like, okay, I have it's put together by two ideas that I'm not allowed to use, like propositions, and I'm going to throw a lot of abstractions into these two sort of weird propositions, and then say, that's my ontology. Okay, this is sort of a half-assed kind of approach to a definition. You might you might categorize this as some kind of definition of ontology, but I don't think it is. It's merely an attempt at coming up with a structure to it rather than a definition of what you're doing, right? If you're sort of defining what a bicycle is, right? It might be it's a different endeavor than from saying that the bicycle is composed of either wheels or something else, right? There are two groups there. There are the wheel aspect and then the rest aspect, right? That's not a definition of a bicycle. That's more a structural description, right? So I wouldn't classify this as a definition or any approach to clarification of what he means by ontology. In order to get a grasp on what I seem to have deduced from what he's written so far is a confused idea of what he's doing. So I would like to have a description of what he thinks he's doing, right? Sort of meta-ontology or whatever you want to call it, right? Okay. Page 60 also, according to Shani, for instance, cosmopsychism entails that an omnipresent cosmic consciousness is the single ontological ultimate there is. Okay. Shani, just to, put you in the right mindset here. According to Shani, well, Shani is it's a phenomena in him. He's referring to a phenomena he has called Shani, and then he expects that phenomena to tell him about ontology. In order to get to that in ontology, he's going to use to classify how to understand what Shani is, right? You see my point? This is the embedded circularity that is everywhere in this text. If I were to deconstruct this, and it would probably take me longer to fully deconstruct it than he has spent on writing it, right? I bet you I would find hundreds and hundreds of circularities here, right? The begging the question is everywhere, right? And all sorts of other fallacies or other incorrect understandings of what he's doing, bringing in, philosophies and science and whatever, right? Page 63, legitimate as an appeal to a divinity might have been in Berkeley's time. Today, more rigor is expected from a viable ontology. So how do we solve the problem of a standalone world under idealism? Who are those we? Isn't it you who's supposed to solve this? Why is it a we all of a sudden? Don't lump me into your text, right? You're responsible for this writing, not me. Okay. Page 67. I think I have actually seen this before. Except for solipsism, any viable ontology must entail at least... Okay. Actually, this is good that I drove this home, right? I took the time to read this potentially again. except for solipsism, any viable ontology must entail. Okay, so if he calls this a viable ontology, which he's implicitly saying here, then it's not solipsist. Well, that's a problem, because ontology is solipsist. When you're doing ontology, you cannot claim an external world while you're doing that. Ontology is before any external world, because you need to classify that which you have and from which you attempt to describe an external world, right? You can't say an external world is given. Now I'm going to describe what I consider an internal world. And after that, I'm going to extend that to an external world. No. That's another circular argument, right? Any viable, what is viable? Give me an understanding what you mean by viable. It's just it's an appeal to, I must be very good at doing this. But you're not really clarifying why you consider this a good approach, right? I consider it a crappy approach, right? Because ontology is describing your phenomena. When you're describing your phenomena, you're basically operating in what would in any case be called solipsism. It doesn't mean you have to stay there in solipsism, so to say. But that's the starting point. And I pointed it out actually for a long time now, not only in this case and recent videos, but I think at least a year or two back, right? That has no bearing on this text as such, but just to clarify to my potential new listeners and so on. And thank you for the new listeners who have arrived, and thank you for the small donations. I appreciate it very much. Even small donations, count, right? Little rivers make a big river, as they say, or what's the metaphor, right? Thank you very much. But still, please consider donation. I appreciate any support I can get, right? But back to this. This implicitly says that he doesn't understand what he's doing. He is lumping an external world into an understanding. An internal world, an external world is there to him. It's given. It's there. He doesn't have. He calls it viable because it's like it is already there. I can't understand it in any other way, right? As if then, or that would mean very, very likely that he don't see any reason to why he should argue for an external world. And there's another, in my recent series on ontology, on my ontology, I criticize this haphazard, way of getting to an external world, which is basically just saying, well, it's there. I don't buy that, because what is the starting point for having an idea of an external world? It must be because you have phenomena. Because you have phenomena, you say, there's something about these phenomena that makes me say there must be an outside world. Well, then the ontology is that which classifies all these phenomena, and ultimately, at some point after the ontology, enables you to say, I'm going to point to this or that phenomena and argue why there is an external world. But he lumps the external world into an already settled ontology that he then describes as an idealism. I have huge problems with that, right? This is sort of a deal breaker to me, right? It's a complete deal breaker because it's not structured enough, right? It's incredible because sometimes people like Bernardo Kastrup can spend pages and pages and pages fly fucking some little aspect, but an external world, I'm just going to lump that into my phenomena, and it's given, right? No need to argue for that. But he can fly fuck some little cosmo-pan computerizationism, on 5 pages, right? And that's why I've considered this academic, polemic, mumbo-jumbo, abstraction, self-jerking, mind-fucking franking monster, right? There's a fucking ontology for you, right? Oh, okay. Except for solipsism, any viable ontology must entail at least one inference beyond direct experience. Okay, so he's actually saying it is kind of strange, this. First he says it's kind of given to that there is an external world, but now he says he has to infer something beyond his experience. Apparently to get to that external world. Why? So what is that inference? That must be the argument I'm asking for. But an inference cannot be an argument, in my opinion. An inference is something that is more closely related to science, right? Science is, in some sense, a kind of inference, right? I have a memory of this. What is the situation now? I'm going to infer into the future that from my abstractions based on my prior empirical observations, I infer into the future that this is going to be the case. But you can know if it's the case before that future becomes the now, and you can have empirical observations about it to confirm that your theory held, right? That's maybe it's not a perfectly correct academic understanding of what you mean by an inference, but I don't like these inferences. I don't like inferences in my ontology, right? Okay. This is necessary to make sense of the fact. Now he brings in fact, right? That's an appeal to knowledge, in my opinion. That we all inhabit the same world. Oh, okay, what world? Beyond ourselves. But we can't inhabit it if it's beyond ourselves, right? It's not, okay, this is where it's like, this external world is just given. There is an external world. Give me the argument. We all inhabit the same world. That's a claim. You can't just bring these claims in, right? You have to argue for them. And you have to argue for them after you have done the ontology, man, right? What is that seeming? Isn't that seeming a kind of experience? Well, that experience must then be classified using your ontology before you can talk about this phenomena seem to point in the direction of. It's again this circularity and cart before the horse and so on. It doesn't work. It's stupid, right? And are unable to change its governing laws. Oh, governing laws. Okay, that sounds like Joe Biden and whoever prime ministers, right? For this reason, physicalism infers the existence of a universe outside consciousness. Infers the existence of a universe outside consciousness. No, isn't that what idealism does? You're saying you have to infer something. I don't think that physicalists are inferring anything. They might maybe subconsciously be doing that, but they haven't said, now I'm going to infer an external world. No, they take for granted that their experiences are the external world, right? We all inhabit. What does inhabit? That's like you're living in France or something like that, right? I'm inhabiting France. He's not in control of his abstractions, right? And this approach is to me the remnant of materialism or naive realism he was probably working for before he had the insight of the paradox built into physicalism. But the remnant of that external world he seems to claim that everybody is inhabiting. And I'm not saying you can't get to a point where you consider that. but I would very much like the fucking surefire argument for why he says there is an external world. He can't argue for an external world while he's doing ontology, because he, in any case, in my opinion, he needs that ontology in order to argue for that external world. Right? Okay, enough of that. Idealism, on the other hand, infers simply that consciousness itself extends beyond its face value personal boundaries. Okay, so it's just extending an abstraction into that realm that he wants to explain, right? This way, while physicalism postulates a fundamentally new ontological class next to experience, idealism simply extrapolates the boundaries of consciousness, the soul, undeniable, and so on. You can read it yourself, right? I was just thinking, okay, if he's dissociated, what allows him to extend whatever he has into that which he's dissociated from? If he's dissociated, he must have an idea that there's a sort of impenetrable wall that is only permeable from the outside in, or something like that, right? It's sort of a semi-permeable or whatever laboratory unit you would use for this, right? So it's semi-permeable from the outside in, somehow, right? So what makes him, or at least he classifies his phenomena as being and some kind of impingement in a semi-permeable membrane called dissociation that can only be impinged from the outside, right? As far as I understand, right? At least in an observation kind of mode. So what makes him able to just extend beyond that dissociation? Right? What? It's like he's forgetting the dissociation, then he comes up with mind everywhere, then he brings back the dissociation and slams it down and say, oh my God, I'm dissociated now. No, if you're dissociated, how do you get to extend beyond your own dissociation? Right? I don't think you can do that. I mean, if you are saying, I am describing my phenomena, you are in a solipsist mode, right? And if you then describe all of your phenomena, categorize it, structurize it, and come up with potential interdependencies, and so on and so on and so on, then you might start to ask yourself, maybe there might be something beyond my phenomena, right, so to say. Okay. Now, as he says, there must be an inference of some kind, right? Okay, let's take that term inference and say that is the argument for why there is an external world. Even though he has completely screwed it up in this text here. But then we've sort of clarified a bit and put it on my plate. I would say, okay, when you build that ontology of yours, what is it about that ontology that makes you able to say there is an external world? If you can't do that, there's only one other option, is I can't argue from my ontology that there must be an external world. Right? There were no backdoors to this. It's not like, okay, now I've done an ontology, now I'm going to listen to my phenomena and let them tell me about an external world. As he attempts to do here, he says something like, to make sense of the fact that we all inhabit the same world beyond ourselves. The fact, is that a fucking fact? I mean, it's a fact, it's knowledge that there's a world beyond ourselves. And this our, I don't like our, don't lump me into it, right? Don't speak for yourself, man, right? How do you get to make a statement like this without any clarification, so far at least, right? If he doesn't come up with a very, very, very strong argument for how he gets to say it's a fact that there is a world beyond myself, right? So, I mean, if it's a fact, why actually does he need to philosophize? Because if it's a fact that something beyond himself, it must really be a fact, whatever it is that he's experiencing. Right? It's difficult to argue for an external world, but it's not difficult to argue for phenomena to me, right? Because they're there. So that must really, 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 really be a fact. If an external world is a fact, right? So why does he need to philosophize and write 145 pages or whatever on this if it's basically must be a fact, everything? I don't get it. How can an external world be a fact if that's the case? But the quote internal world has to be very, very scrutinized and argued for on 145 pages, but the external world is just given as a fact. How does that fucking work? In all of, go back in the history of philosophy, and that's not necessarily a good argument, but it has been a recurring theme. What about this external world? Is there an external world? Or am I have a direct access to that external world? What about my internal world and all this, right? It's a recurring problem. He's just saying, it's a fact there's an external world. Done. Right? I'm not buying it. Okay. Next. It's page 68. To put it another way. Yeah, let's put it another way, right? Let's write some more text. One's brain's activity is part of a phenomenal representation of one's inner life. And of course, a representation must correlate with the phenomenal process. How do you know it's a representation? A representation is a qualification of your phenomena. Right? If you say, that phenomena, I call that brain. Okay, fair enough, call it brain. Okay, and it's also representation. Hey, how did you know that? How did you get to that? Of representation of another phenomena or what? Or is it a representation of something outside your phenomena? Because your ontology can't help you classifying something outside your phenomena. So you can't get to that relation between your phenomena and what might be beyond or before your phenomena. But calling a representation, you're sort of bringing in meaning just by using language, right? I'm not buying it. Another one I'm not buying, right? So he is bringing in his presuppositions using language, right? And careful, look for these things, because it's prevalent in basically all philosophy. All this bringing shit in using language, right? And of course, a representation must correlate with the phenomenal process it is the appearance of without requiring anything ontologically distinct from consciousness. That this correlation is empirically observed is not... No, it cannot fucking be empirically observed, right? Is thus entirely consistent with idealism. Yeah, but then idealism is completely fucked, right? Brain is what is empirical. But what brain is then potentially based on, which is an abstraction you have created or an axiom, cannot be fucking empirical. Because you're talking about brain or what might be behind brain only because you had the experience brain or the phenomena brain. So you can't take some other avenue with Quayle and say, I'm going behind the brain and studying what is responsible for brain. Fuck off, man, right? Doesn't work. Page 71. They simply do not acknowledge that this world is ontologically distinct from consciousness itself. Okay, I would like to know what that world is, but this is out of context, right? Indeed, by acknowledging that dissociation in universal consciousness implies a world outside their own personal mentation, idealists look upon this world in a way entirely compatible with naturalism and scientific inquiry. Okay, well that's bullshit then, right? You can't use science to study what is beyond science. It's ridiculous. Idealism, page 73. Idealism is a unique ontology. Oh, it's modern and unique, and I'm simply so, I love it so much, this ontology of mine, right? Oh, and you should too. It's so lovely in that, unlike physicalism and panpsychism, it asserts that physical structures are circumscribed by consciousness, as opposed to the other way around. Physical structures are circumscribed by consciousness. Okay, that's a very convoluted way of putting it, right? Rather than saying that, well, it's all a kind of phenomena you're referring to. If you have sort of, quote, access to it, it's some kind of phenomena. Okay? You're not talking about things you don't have access to. You can talk about them in an abstract manner, but you can't talk about them as if you're experiencing them, right? So if you're experiencing brain, that must be a phenomena then. Otherwise, what the hell are you talking about it, right? If it's not a phenomena, what is it then? It's an abstraction. Well, in my opinion, abstractions only arrive because of some kind of phenomena. And then this abstraction is also a phenomena. Otherwise, you wouldn't have access to it, right? So no matter what you do, it's always some kind of phenomena. Even your imaginations about an external world is a phenomena, right? You can't get outside your phenomena. Because if it's out your phenomena, they're not there. You don't have access to them, right? So it's sort of a very weird pipe dream of this external world, and you have to bring some of your abstractions along in order to describe that external world somehow or some way, right? That's why he talks about ripples, for instance, right? That's just an abstraction. He just tags along when he travels to his fantasy realm, right? Idealism is a unique ontology in that, okay, let me jump in. As such, page 74, as such, idealism is an entirely plausible, it's not about plausibility. You are describing your phenomena, right? It's not about, I think it's plausible that I have colors, right? It's weird. It's a very strong sign to me that he doesn't understand what he's doing, right? But because he has been groomed into thinking that he's a very, very smart academic, whatever, right? Doctor, PhD. That whatever he can come up with must be smart. But I don't think he has done the ground level thinking here and trying to push back against things. No. Be a little skeptical about it, right? Which is a very healthy approach to your philosophy. Be skeptical, man, right? All right. Page 87. Philosophically, this would corroborate the ontology of physicalism while contradicting alternatives like panpsychism, cosmopsychism, and idealism. It would leave us with no way to circumvent the arguably insoluble hard problem of consciousness. So far, no real description or clarification of what is meant by ontology, right? The ontology discussed in this dissertation has at its foundation an observation as simple as it is far-reaching. Matter is the outer appearance of inner experience. But ontology, its foundation in an observation. So you're basing your ontology on an observation. That must be empirical, right? So it's you're basing it on a color or a sound or something like that. But you're trying to classify and describe them. You're not trying to observe anything, right? Again, these terms used point in a bad direction for that points in the direction that you don't have a grasp of what you're doing, in my opinion. And that's why I keep saying that when you're operating at this ground level of philosophy, the road is paved with circular arguments. That doesn't work, of course, right? Because they're circular. Circularity is possibly everywhere in people's philosophy concerning this shit, right? Because they think that they need to explain when they're doing ontology, and that's exactly the only thing that you must not do when you're doing ontology. Because what are you using to explain with? You need an ontology of some kind in order to explain something. Well, if you're building an ontology, you can't have an ontology to use to explain something with. So ontology is merely and only descriptive. It's not explanatory, right? It's quite easy to, I don't see why this is so hard to understand, but you might not like that it's the case or that it's good thinking because it takes away a lot of ability to point fingers and whatever, write some very fancy articles and books and so on, right? Potentially at least. Page 95. The ontology is page 97. So the noumenal does exist. My point being simply, so there's a new term here, the noumenal, right? That's a reference to Immanuel Kant, I would say. Okay, so another term for, right? Yet another term does exist. My point being simply that its essential nature is experiential. What? The noumena is that which you can't experience. Otherwise, it's phenomena, according to Kant at least, as I believe, right? My point being simply that its essential nature is experiential. How does he do this, right? This very much sounds like, yes, what is beyond my experiences is also experiential, right? I mean, can you understand it in any other way? Is it just my, language barrier here or something? I can only read this as, oh my God. Oh. The noumenal itself consists of experiences. Okay, but then it's not your experiences then, right? Even though these experiences are qualitatively different from personal perceptions. No. Oh man. This is fucking next level abstraction upon abstraction upon abstraction, right? In summary, this is what he has labeled in some of his recent videos as obscurantism, or at least it's sort of it gets so convoluted in terms and imagination abstraction that you are basically lost any foothold of what the fuck we're doing here, right? And as soon as I get a sense of that, I'm saying fuck it, right? I don't want any philosophical text or presentation to be this level of layered, right? In semantics and abstractions and imaginations and so on. At the end of the day, I have to go buy these fucking tomatoes, right? Why would I care about all this shit? Page 98. So it could be argued that analytic idealism, in addition to consciousness itself, assumes a space-time scaffolding as extra-ontological primitive, wherein consciousness can then move so to have or produce particular experiences, but this would contradict my core claim that universal phenomenal consciousness is the sole ontological primitive. I don't know. I don't know, man, right? To avoid confusion, allow me to explicitly relate these ideas to the ontological thesis of presentism. Yet another ism. How the fuck many isms are there in ontology? Presentism, eternalism, computerism, and panpsychism. How? I mean, somebody make a list of all these fucking isms. I also claim that the experiential concepts we label as past and future, and which motivate the theoretical abstractions of a past and a future, ontologically distinct from the now, are as real as what we call the present, in that all three exist solely as phenomenal states experienced in the now. I would agree with that. Okay, does it have to be called an ism, right? But if something is in the past, you do not have access to it, right? Because it's in the past. And if you have access to something you call the past, it must be here in the now, right? You just call it the past because it's some kind of memory stored representation, maybe you could call, of something you experienced in the past, so to say, right? But it has to be here now if you access it. If I try to recall something I experienced like yesterday, or even, in the morning here, earlier in the day, right? I can recall, I did that thing, right? I brewed my coffee, whatever, right? But it's not, I'm not accessing, I'm not tapping, I'm not reaching back into time and looking at the past. I have brought the past with me into the now, so to say, using a memory. So I'm fine with that. Fine. No problem, right? But this is all circumstantial, right? In this latter sense, past and present future are ontologically equivalent. Indeed, the partitioning of the salient... Oh my God, right? What a fucking... He's self-absorbed in his ability to use fancy language, right? He loves to shove this language in your face, right? Because it makes him feel, oh my God, the words I can put together, right? Mommy, look at me. So, in this latter sense, past, present, and future are ontologically equivalent. Indeed, the partitioning of the salient conceptual space between presentism and eternalism is not the most appropriate for the ideas I am attempting to convey here, and hence should be regarded with caution. This isn't even the worst, right? But it's sort of ontologically equivalent, partitioning of salient conceptual space between presentive, this one, partitioning the salient conceptual space between presentism and eternalism. It's like it borders on, poetry or something like that, right? If you are making your text in sort of half fancy linguistic, right? You are not trying to make sure that necessarily as many people as possible understands what you're trying to say, but you are trying to impress somebody, right? And you're certainly not trying to impress those who might not understand what the fuck you're trying to say. You're trying to impress somebody who likes to be impressed by fancy talk and not necessarily good philosophy. That's why I don't like this kind of lingo, right? Keep it basic, right? Page 101. Whatever reality precedes space-time ontologically is unreachable by linguistic reasoning. Yeah, but reasoning doesn't necessarily need to be linguistic. Linguistic is language or speech or talking or something like that. But reasoning can be done without saying anything. Mute people can reason, right? And if they don't have any arms to write with or make smoke signals or whatever, right? You don't need a language to reason. It's just a weird. It's also it's sort of a Freudian slip of some kind, right? Or it points in it to him. Philosophy is I am fucking spewing words out. That is philosophy. No. What you're writing here is a representation of your philosophy. Your philosophy is some thinking you're doing in your mind, so to say, right? The thinking you're doing is the philosophy. What you're doing here is a representation of that thinking. 101. However, those conceptual systems can still be penultimately true in the sense that they said, why use this penultimately true, right? It's the second to last. The penultimate dinner, right? The penultimate supper with Monty Python, right? And, where Michelangelo has painted 3 kangaroos the kangaroo, 3 Christ, and 28 disciples, right? But it's not the Last Supper then. Okay, well then let's call it the penultimate supper, right? Well, but why are you painting 3 Christs? Well, I thought that the 2 skinny ones would balance with the fat Christ. It's one of the most funniest sketches they made, right? I may not understand art, but I know what I like, says the Pope, right? Oh, it's funny, man. Okay. True in the sense that they can accurately correspond to something ontologically prior to dimensionality. Yeah. Go play with that, right? This way to say that experiences are vibrations of universal phenomenal consciousness admittedly cannot be ultimately true, for consciousness as sole ontological primitive does not occupy a space-time scaffolding prior to itself. What the hell is he talking about? This is where, on page 100 and so forth, he is now living in his abstract cloud castles, right? And he's never coming back. He's never going to be concerned about tomatoes, right? Never in a fucking million years. He has carved out his perfect cloud castle and he's going to stay there until the big daddy mind comes and sucks him dry and steals his logbook to know what the fuck is going on out there, right? Oh. Visualizing the ontological primitive. Okay. So let's dive in here, right? That sounds good. That might be tasty. As a matter of fact, yeah, great start, right? Fact? No. There are no facts in ontology, right? Space itself can be coherently regarded as the quality of human experience that corresponds most closely to the universal phenomenal consciousness. Why? It can be regarded as, okay, so it can also not be regarded as. Different, it's sort of this sophist, well, it could be regarded. And if it's true, I'm going to actually say it's true. So I'm working on that, right? I have an idea. It could be true. It's very likely it's true. Actually, I think it's true now. Mommy, I did it, right? How far did I get? Different segments of the latter corresponding to different versions of space. Indeed, the 2 living organisms, the intrinsic appearances of alters, never occupy the same volume of space, reflects the notion that different alters. But you're referring to your experience. Space is then a part of your ontology. If you can talk about it and have access to it, it's a part of your ontology. So you're talking about how your phenomena are dispersed in this thing you call space within your ontology. And then you're saying that is also going on out there. That is a materialist, physicalist approach to metaphysics, right? Can't you see that, man, right? It's bozo level of philosophy, this. Page 104. It remains my hope that this dissertation motivates analytic philosophy to reconsider idealism not only as viable, but perhaps even the most promising avenue for circumventing the fundamental problems faced today in ontology. Yeah, it's an academic thing. It's not something you can do. There is faced in ontology somebody working out there. Just shut up and pay your taxes and let the academics take care of this. It's so hard. I have to elaborate on it on 140 pages while I throw around my abstractions, right? To me, analytic at this point means I'm going to stay with my fucking abstractions, right? I'm going to leave direct experience behind and only bring it in when I need some kind of weird argument to put this tapestry together, right? Otherwise, I'm going to jump and, juggle all my abstractions and come up with shit that sounds fanciful and then write it in a paper. That's what I consider analytic at this point. That's the best description I can give, right? I have no patience with it. Okay, page 105. The contemporary cultural mindset posits that the world has no intrinsic semantic value. Semantic value. So there's a meaning that is value to something that experience, that world that is experienced. The meaning we see in it is supposedly projected onto the world by ourselves. I would say so. Underpinning this view is the mainstream. Because if you have an abstraction, you say value, it must be something you bring to the table, right? Otherwise, how does it arrive to you? If you have an external world that, for instance, arrives through your senses, so to say, then what sense, through which sense does value arrive? Right? I can get to that, right? So it must be something you add from the inside, so to say. It's not that hard. Underpinning this view is the mainstream physicalist ontology, according to which mind is an emergent property of epiphenomenon of brains. Indeed, according to the mainstream physicalist ontology, the fundamental building blocks of reality are physical elements that exist independently of mind. Yeah, that is crazy. I would agree with that. Okay, page 107. The ontological status of the world. Haven't I read this before? The mainstream physicalist notion that the world is outside. Okay, he calls the world something he experience, right? So the status of the world is something he's experiencing. So he can experience the ontology that is sort of roaming around in that world. It sounds like he's experiencing an ontology and he doesn't like it. No, it's just this. This is all over the place, in my opinion, right? This is very far from rigid and structured and carefully constructed, right? It's just polemic. It's all over the place, right? And there's equivocations or bringing in new terms out of nowhere, right? Taking understandings for granted, and it's basically wishful thinking that is just condensed into some harebrained academic language, right? The mainstream physicalist notion that the world is outside independent of mind is an abstract explanatory model constructed in thought, not an empirical observation. All right. Page 111. Philosophers have recently proposed coherent ontologies that can, at least in principle, make sense of reality without the need to postulate anything distinct from mind itself. Okay, in the West, the inception of these notions goes, of course, all the way back to Plato and his theory of ideas. According to it, ontological ground of reality is archetypal thoughts in transpersonal mind. With this focus on closed literal explanation, the physicalist ontology, the physical ontology, surprisingly, as we will see later, there is some meaningful life following ontological trauma. Ontological trauma. By projecting our ontological essence onto ephemeral arrangements of matter. It creates an opportunity to protect the ego from what has historically been the greatest angst of humankind, the experiential unknown of the after-death state. Whoa! Yes, it's because the Western world was inflicted with the death cult of Christianity that they feared at the after-death state, right? No wonder. Since they were little children, they see this man nailed to a fucking cross. And they were, scared, scared their children with the, you will burn in hell forever if you don't, do what your masters tell you, right? Or you will be beaten, spare the rod, spoil the... No fucking wonder they were afraid, man, right? Okay. I hypothesize that a profound and disturbing change in the intellectual elite's understanding of the nature of their own being, that is an ontological trauma, was the specific, forceful, and personal trigger that helped congeal the physicalist narrative. What is he talking about, man? I know this is taken out of context, but still, when somebody uses the term profound, right? Be careful, because they're probably trying to fuck with your mind, right? There might be a few things that are really profound, right? And you could say, possibly argue that if you realize that the physicalist metaphysics is paradoxical, that is a profound insight, because it has ramifications of your complete understanding of your experience, right? That could be classified as profound, right? And disturbing, right? I would agree, right? It was quite profound and disturbing to me, right? But be careful with these. I would say these terms have nothing to do in an ontology, right? It's not helpful to say this is very interesting, right? It's like the director popping in the middle of the movie and saying, "Hey, look at that dinosaur in my movie over there. That's very profound and disturbing, isn't it? Isn't it? Isn't it?" It's like, fuck off, man. Let me enjoy the movie, right? Okay. Ontological trauma may have thus triggered fluid compensation and ultimately led to an intellectual elite. So now he is sort of psychologizing on those who are physicalists or what. Fuck off with that, right? Okay, the last one. Perhaps for this reason, a large segment of society seeks meaning through alternative ontologies, considered outdated and untenable by the intellectual elites, such as religious dualism. Okay, so there's no real clarification of what he means by ontology and what entails in ontology and what doesn't, right? Philosophy is a vast array of kinds of thinking. So you might need to really clarify what you're actually attempting to do in a sort of, okay, when I'm doing ontology, this is what I'm trying to do. And I'm not trying to do that, because that is not what you do when you do ontology. No, he just sets out and says, I'm going to prove this. And then he throws words at you for 140 pages and say, hey, the other people are stupid. They're suffering from ontological trauma. So go over to mine, right? It's like, fuck off, man. Okay. Please share, like, subscribe. Let me have your comment and consider donation. Links below and also on the board. Beyond that, have a nice day. See you in the next one.